So everybody loves a good tier list. I mean, I make one for every WoW patch that comes out, and they turn out to usually be some of my most popular videos, because who doesn't love pop on YouTube, see what some guy on the internet thinks about your spec, maybe agree with them, maybe flame them in the comments. Either way, it's a ton of fun. And if you're just watching these tier list videos for your own entertainment, good for you, because that's really the value that they bring. But if you are using these tier lists to help inform you of what spec to play in the game, in this video I want to try and convince you guys that that's probably not the best idea. And I'm going to use the 10.1, 10.1.5 Holy Paladin as my basis to try and convince you to stop listening to tier lists. Before Dragonflight Season 2 was released, many content creators, myself included, were making tier lists of what healers we thought would be best in Mythic Plus for Dragonflight Season 2. Pretty much across the board, Holy Paladin was thought to be sort of a middling or below average healer. Look, here's me putting Holy Paladin in the B tier. What an asshole. Alright, let's get into Holy Paladin. While I think Paladins will definitely be able to work in very high level keys, when we make a tier list, we are literally comparing it to all other healing specs and looking at the totality of Paladin's healing, throughput, and DPS. It's hard to make a case for it taking it over any of the aforementioned healers. I do think the Avenging Crusader rework has potential, but it feels like Holy Paladin is more than one single talent rework away from competing with the big dogs. B-Res, of course, is really helpful, but what's not helpful is the popularity of both Prot and Ret Paladins and Pug keys, and inviting that third pink class might be kind of a hard sell. Anyway, the point is nobody thought much of Holy Paladin going into Season 2, and if you're a die-hard Holy Paladin main, that might have been a little discouraging to you, or maybe you'd just seen the light, pun intended, way before the rest of us. Starting a week or two ago, we started seeing a major surge of Holy Paladins healing extremely high keys, and on websites like Subcreation and Raider.io, HPAL was suddenly flying to the top of the ranks. Surely this is the result of some major buff or hotfix that's broken Holy Paladin and proved all those smarty pants YouTube people wrong. Right? Well, no. There were some buffs to Holy Prism going into the tier, but for the most part, Holy Paladin went live as was expected, and for the first couple weeks it performed exactly as people thought, somewhat below average. But then something amazing happened, my friends. First of all, through the act of actually playing the game, we realized that Dragonflight Season 2 Mythic Plus dungeons actually are not identical to Season 1 and call for some different things from their healers. While Season 1 was definitely a challenging season, especially at first when it went live, the burst damage, rot damage, and spot healing were nothing like what we see in Season 2. That means that healers with damage reductions are going to be valued more highly, again, a place where Holy Paladin excels. It's also a dungeon pool in which having an immunity or just generally being very survivable is super beneficial, all of which are things Holy Paladin excels at. Imagine that. Not being dead can be a really great trait to have in a Mythic Plus group. So the dungeon pool played directly into the playstyle of Holy Paladin, and as people were taking on higher and higher keys, Paladins started looking pretty good to healers. There's also healer damage to consider, or lack thereof. One of the biggest knocks on Holy Paladin coming into this season was low damage. Historically, healer damage tended to be one of the biggest factors in determining the healer meta in high keys. Interestingly though, in Season 2, healing checks are so high that healer damage seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside, and it's much less of a factor. Healer damage also seems to have kind of scaled poorly from Season 1, with healers making up quite a small percentage of the group's overall damage. Smaller than I can think of in any season of recent memory. So in a way, Holy Paladin got a bit of a pass with their low DPS since it's not that important in Season 2 of Dragonflight anyway. But it wasn't even really that started putting Holy Paladin over the top. Nope, it was actually the announcement that Holy Paladin was going to get a rework in 10.1.5 that seemed to pique the interest of the community, particularly high-end key pushers. This rework appears to be very, very good for Holy Paladins in Mythic Plus, adding more options for damage and better spot healing. I'll link the entire patch notes in the description if you want to look at them all, but let's touch upon just some of the highlights. Holy Shock now has an 8.5 second cooldown, up from 7.5, but now has 2 charges with the new Light's Conviction talent. We have some major buffs to Glimmer of Light, and also the choice between 2 talents, Illumination and Blessed Focus, to either raise or lower the number of players it affects. Spot healing is looking a lot better with Hand of Divinity, Rising Sunlight, and with the buffs to Flash of Light and Holy Light. I think that's going to be an area where Holy Paladin is really going to excel. Judgment now generates 1 holy power and consumes infusion of light procs to prevent damage. Honestly, there's a ton here and I just recommend checking out the patch notes to see everything, but it appears to sum up to looking very good and fun for Mythic Plus Holy Paladins. So hilariously, it wasn't actually a rework of the Holy Paladin, but the anticipation of a rework for the Holy Paladin that convinced high key pushers to start pushing high keys with Holy Paladin, and thus realizing that Holy Paladin is good at pushing high keys, and thusly changing the community's perception of how good Holy Paladin is in Mythic Plus, begging the question, do specs need reworks, or just the anticipation of reworks? No, but seriously, I think this is an amazing example of how everyone's perception of specs can be completely off base, and also just how influenced the community at large is by the players at the top of the food chain. It really is quite astounding. So what should we take away from all this? Personally, while I think this has always been true, my biggest takeaway here is that you should just play the damn spec you want to play. If you think it's going to be good, or you think you're going to be good with it, or you just think it's fun and you enjoy it, just play the fucking spec and stop worrying about what people on the internet think. The last thing you'd want to do is abandon your favorite spec to play the meta, only to find out that your favorite spec was the meta all along. Kinda makes you wonder what other specs might be criminally underrated and could potentially be super meta in high keys if they were given the chance, the way Holy Paladin was when the rework was announced. Mistweavers sound off? I'm not making this video to discredit anyone. There are a ton of knowledgeable content creators that make tier lists online and put a lot of thought and testing into them. The thing is, until you get into the nitty gritty of a season and run these dungeons over and over and over again, it can be really hard to know what's going to wind up on top, and you also have to remember that the healer meta is just as much formed by the tank and DPS meta too, and what they bring or don't bring to the table. There has been a movement away from Prot Paladin at the highest levels recently, and more toward Vengeance Demon Hunter because of the amount of damage they do, and that's also going to influence the ability for Holy Paladins to sneak into high-end group comps with their amazing utility. All in all, I actually think healer balance is really good right now, with a whole bunch of specs performing very well, and it hasn't at all been the Resto Shaman fest we expected. So Donkey, you're gonna stop making tier list videos after this one, right? Wrong, no, I'm gonna keep making them because viewers love them and they love to engage with them. That's what YouTube is all about. However, I do hope that when you guys watch mine, or anybody else's for that matter, you remember that nobody really has all the answers. You should enjoy it. You can kind of take everybody's different thoughts and add them to your own, but in the end, you should really just play the spec that brings you the most enjoyment. Speaking of enjoyment, if you enjoyed this video, I always appreciate a thumbs up. Subscribe to see more of my content in the future. Check out my stream right here on YouTube, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday night, where we heal M+ keys all night long and have tons of fun doing it. I'd love to see you there. Until next time, guys, happy healing.